Hello, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivera. Welcome to Red and Blue. The Labor Department on Thursday said 1.4 million Americans filed new jobless claims last week. It is the first time that number has gone up from the previous week since March and is higher than economists had predicted. Coronavirus cases continue to surge across the country. The U.S. recorded more than 915,000 new COVID-19 infections in the past 2 weeks. That's more cases in 2 weeks than the entire month of June. And as the nation's confirmed coronavirus cases surpass 4 million, experts are warning the actual number is likely much higher. Meanwhile, President Trump is doubling down on his push to deploy federal law enforcement officers to cities across the country as part of Operation Legend. The plan is drawing condemnation from mayors and governors who have said they do not need and do not want federal agents in their cities and states. It comes as protests in Portland, Oregon, continued Wednesday for the 55th consecutive night. The city's mayor, Ted Wheeler, was among a crowd of protesters tear-gassed by federal agents outside of a federal courthouse. The Department of Justice says it has launched an investigation into use of force allegations by officers there. In the middle of all of this is Congress. The clock is ticking for lawmakers to pass another federal coronavirus relief package. Unemployment benefits included in previous legislation are set to expire soon. Millions of Americans are facing the threat of eviction at the end of the month, and schools are questioning whether or not it is safe to bring students and teachers back into classrooms. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer were asked about negotiations and whether they would accept a partial deal earlier today. Here's some of what they had to say.
This is a package. We cannot piecemeal this. This is, as you see, it has an integrity. It has a oneness about meeting the needs of the American people.
We're not going to take care of one portion of suffering people and leave everyone else hanging. That's what they may want to do. Take care of this and then they'll go home. No way. This is a comprehensive proposal that addresses the many problems of COVID, and we have to address it as a totality.
Nancy Cordes and Paul Kane join me now. Nancy is CBS News chief congressional correspondent, and Paul is the senior congressional correspondent for The Washington Post. Welcome to both of you. Nancy, let me start with you. Senate Republican leaders said last night they reached a fundamental agreement with the White House. What does that agreement look like?
Well, we don't know exactly, Tanya, because even though they claimed to have reached that fundamental agreement, there is still some fine print they're apparently working out, and that means they're actually not going to be able to unveil their final plan until next week. And so what this, in effect, has done is sort of pushed back all of the negotiations that were supposed to take place between Republicans and Democrats, because Republicans had to hammer out so many of these details with the White House, where they really didn't see eye to eye with the president. Here's what we do know. We know that Republicans support another round of direct payments to Americans. We know that they support more money for the PPP. That's the program that gives money to small, medium-sized businesses around the country to keep their workers on board, to stay afloat. And we know that they want to do something to address unemployment payments in this country, but it's still unclear. Just today, we heard a new plan from the Treasury Secretary, Steven Mnuchin. There are still some Republicans who say they don't want to renew these expanded unemployment benefits for Americans that are set to run out next week. So still a lot of questions about what exactly it is that Republicans are going to support before we even move on to the next phase, which is a negotiation with Democrats, who obviously want to spend a lot more money than Republicans do.
So, Paul, initially President Trump said he would not sign any legislation that didn't include a payroll tax cut. Has he let go of that now? And additionally, I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about the negotiations among Republicans who now seem very worried about the cost when under this Republican administration, the federal deficit has ballooned. So, why the sudden fear right now about cost?
Well, first of all, what McConnell wanted to do was to try and bring together all these different pieces of this puzzle, to put it together as one large package that would be a counter to what Nancy Pelosi has already passed out of the House. As Nancy Cortez has just said, the two most powerful Nancys in Congress, as I like to say, as Nancy laid out, they've got one part of this down. That's the sort of spending part on how to help out colleges, schools to get more testing, PPE. But the rest of the program is still really up in the air. They're trying to figure out what little bits can go into this, and it's going to end up being like 5 different proposals all at once. Now, there's a whole conservative wing led by Ted Cruz, Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, who are now at a point where they're just kind of standing up saying, I don't like spending money. It's just something that I don't really like doing. And I think deep down, they see the polls, they see Trump is not doing well, and they're beginning to sort of go back to their old roots, back when they used to oppose a lot of spending when Obama was president. They kind of abandoned that pledge for the previous 3 years when Trump was riding high and looked like he might get reelected and he had a 95% approval. They kind of tamped down their criticism. But now, all of a sudden, they're looking around and being like, this guy might not be here anymore, so I might go back to my old ideological ways.
Interesting. All right. So, Nancy, let's talk about unemployment insurance. Extra funding is set to run out this week. Where do things stand? Could that be a limiting factor in getting legislation passed?
Absolutely. So, as Paul pointed out, Democrats a couple of months ago passed legislation that would extend these expanded unemployment benefits, $600 a week over and above what people get from their state unemployment offices around the country, expanding that through the end of next January. So after the presidential election, this would just continue on for the now 30 million people, 1 in 5 American workers, who are currently out of a job. For a long time, Republicans, including McConnell, were saying, you know what, we're going to let those unemployment benefits lapse in July. They felt that it was too much money, that it was discouraging some workers from going back to work, even if they had the opportunity, because they would make more money on unemployment than they would on the job. And so for a long time, they just said, we're going to let those lapse. But now when push comes to shove and they're about to run out, you've got some Republicans saying, well, wait a minute, we still got so many people out of work through no fault of their own. They don't have a job to go back to. Perhaps we should extend these, but maybe not at $600. Maybe it should be at some other amount. But the problem is we're already up against the wall here. You've already got millions of Americans who don't know whether their unemployment checks are going to drop severely next week or not, with very little time to work out some kind of middle ground. And so into all of this, the White House today put forth a new proposal saying, well, maybe we should give Americans 70% of their former wages, so nobody makes more than they were making before. The problem is these are the kinds of things that take time to negotiate, and it's looking pretty clear that they're not going to reach some kind of agreement before the current boost in unemployment runs out.
Oh, wow. So, Paul, almost 3 years ago, Senate Republicans tried and failed to pass a repeal of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. Of course, that failed in part due to internal disagreements, but you say that something similar could happen with this legislation. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. So what happened 3 years ago was McConnell was up against the wall, and it was a similar sort of quasi-artificial deadline. And he basically tried to put together what he called skinny repeal of the ACA, just the most basic bare bones stuff that they could agree on to sort of buy more time to keep negotiating with House Republicans. What you're already starting to hear from some of the Republicans this week, Rob Portman of Ohio, most particularly, he's one of the guys out there who's just saying, well, we got to do something about unemployment. We have to extend unemployment benefits. We can't have that cliff. It would be such a hit to the economy. So why don't we just do that for a couple months, and that way we can buy more time to keep negotiating. Democrats, as you saw, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer know that they have all the leverage when they're completely united, and they just basically said, no way. We are not doing skinny. They didn't say skinny COVID relief, but that's the name I'm trying to give it. But yeah, they were just totally against it.
All right, I want to pivot now to New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who took to the House floor Thursday to respond to comments allegedly made by Florida Congressman Ted Yoho. Here's some of what she had to say. Let's listen.
I walked back out, and there were reporters in the front of the Capitol. And in front of reporters, Representative Yoho called me, and I quote, a bitch. These are the words that Representative Yoho levied against a congresswoman. The congresswoman that not only represents...
Nancy, that's pretty powerful stuff. What led up to this moment, and how significant is Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's speech today?
What led up to it was a kind of non-apology apology from Congressman Yoho on the House floor yesterday, where he said that he should have used better language, but also denied saying what reporters heard him say, which was the kind of language that you just heard from Congresswoman on the House floor. I think that she found this as an opportunity to make a point. She has obviously come under fire from all sides on the conservative side of the spectrum since she took office. And the point that she made on the House floor today, in what was a fairly moving and riveting speech, was that by using that kind of language about her, what Congressman Yoho was doing was giving permission to other men to use that kind of language against young women like his own daughters. And so clearly she found this to be an opportunity to make a point about language, about the way that members of Congress should treat each other, and I think it's informed by all the things that she's heard said and written about her since she took office.
It was, as you said, a pretty rousing speech, and it has gotten a lot of traction online. Do you think this is something that could have any long-term effects on Representative Yoho's career?
I think he is somewhat of a backbencher. He's not somebody who usually jumps into this sort of partisan fire. It was just an unusual moment for him. Congresswoman Jayapal, the leader of the Progressive Caucus, spoke right after Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, and she even noted that she has traveled on foreign congressional delegations with Mr. Yoho, and she found him to be otherwise kind of like nice. So she was just as stunned by all of this. I think it's all really interesting when you consider that this is a week in which you had Donald Trump and his closest allies, Republican allies, attacking Liz Cheney, the highest ranking Republican woman. And now you have Ted Yoho attacking Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And it just feeds into this never-ending narrative for Republicans that they just have trouble dealing with women in power.
The optics certainly are not good. All right. Well, Nancy Cortez and Paul Kane, thanks to both of you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.